name is Gabriella Cacciotti, and today I would like to talk to you about the concept of entrepreneurial fear failure. So together we're gonna cover 4 major points in the next 10 minutes. I'm gonna talk about the nature of fear failure, then I focus on the connection between culture and fear failure. Then I'll focus on the concept of fear failure within the context of entrepreneurship, and I will conclude with some practical implications or some tips for entrepreneurs and people working with entrepreneurs and how together they can move through the experience of fear failure. So what is fear failure? Fear failure as a concept was born in the field of psychology, and psychologists tend to consider fear failure in 2 different ways. They tend to look at it as a personality trait, as something that is stable within any individuals. And those who have high tendency of experiencing fear failure, they are different from those who don't. And they experience fear failure no matter the context, the performative context in which they are operating. Performative contexts are those contexts that offer the possibility to succeed and fail, such as sports, education, and entrepreneurship. So those who are high in fear failure, in the tendency of experience of fear failure, they will always tend to do so. No matter the context in which they are operating. But there's also another way of defining fear failure. Fear failure can be considered as a temporary emotion, as something that is triggered by a specific event in a specific context in which people are operating. And I like to look at this construct as an emotion, as something that everybody can experience, no matter who they are and no matter the context in which they are operating, because pretty much depends on the events, on external events that they are experiencing, and depends on their goal. So let's consider the example of entrepreneurs who are creating their venture, and let's consider an external event such as losing the opportunity of securing the next round of funding. That event can trigger the experience of fear failure. And those who experience fear failure in general, what it is that they experience? They experience some sort of, what they picture in their mind is the aversive consequences of failure. This is what they fear. And in general, what are the aversive consequences of failure? Well, they are the possibility, the fear in experiencing shame and embarrassment should failure manifest itself, fear of devaluating your self-esteem, fear of having an uncertain future, fear of important others losing interest, and then fear of upsetting important others. So this is fear failure. Fear failure is the fear in some sort of aversive consequences of failure. But where fear of failure comes from? Well, research in psychology has shown that fear failure comes from, for example, some relationships that you have formed in your life, especially in your early childhood, and especially with your parents. So it's relationships that you have formed with your parents, and especially with your mother in this case. So it's how you grew up and what happened to you as an individual in your life within your household especially. But fear of failure has also some cultural roots. So fear of failure comes from your cultural background. And there are 2 ways of looking at culture. We can define culture in terms of individual values. And so this is about your orientations, norms, and practices of the place in which you grow up. And they influence your motivations and behaviors and beliefs, such as your fear of failure. I think about some Eastern cultures, for example, the Chinese culture, where there is a strong stigmatization of failure at social level. These are cultures where it's very important, the concept of social respect. So failure for you can be a situation in which you lose your face. your reputation in front of others. So in those cultures, an experience of failure has a strong impact on the fear of disappointing important others. So the major source of a fear of failure from those cultures are the fear related to disappointing important others and important others losing interest. And this is true for any context of life, especially for fear failure in entrepreneurship. And I think about a Chinese entrepreneur who might have a strong sense of a social context attributed to failure more than financial costs, for example. But there is also another way of defining culture that has an impact in the way we shape our understanding of a fear of failure. Culture can also be seen in terms of and defined in terms of institutions. This means that we can define culture in terms of regulations and norms attributed to specific happenings that impact entrepreneurship. For example, we can look at how bankruptcy is regulated in certain countries. I think about Italy, where it's a strict regulation of bankruptcy, which impact your future opportunities of securing funding. So let's assume an entrepreneur, a Chinese entrepreneur who comes to Italy, and he comes there with his baggage of individual cultural values of the place in which she grew up. So I think about this Chinese entrepreneur with a strong social costs attributed to failure, who comes into a country and starts a business here where he knows there is a strict bankruptcy regulation and my impact is future opportunities. So for this specific entrepreneur's fear of failure is coming from his social sphere, but also from the fears that he has in terms of is having an uncertain future should the failure manifest itself in the business. This is to say that when we think about a migrant entrepreneur and we want to understand the way he or she experiences fear of failure, do not stop only to the understanding of the cultural background in which he grew up, so his country of origin, but we also need to think about the national culture in which he or she is trying to develop the business. Now, we have introduced a little bit the concept of fear of failure in entrepreneurship. So why we don't define what entrepreneurial fear of failure is? Why do we need to be specific about the definition of a fear of failure in this specific context? Because in the end, fear of failure is a situated phenomenon, meaning that it changes depending the context in which we are studying it. So if we're studying fear of failure in education, we try to define it in that specific context. And if we're trying to study fear of failure in entrepreneurship, then let's study it in entrepreneurship. And in fact, I've been spending 10 years of my life studying this concept for entrepreneurs, what it is fear of failure for entrepreneurs. And I found that the sources of fear of failure for entrepreneurs are slightly different than the sources of fear of failure in general, the one I defined at the very beginning of this talk. So fear of failure for entrepreneurs is the fear of having an uncertain future, not having the ability to develop the business, is the fear of my idea not having enough potential, enough value to allow me to make money, is the fear of opportunity cost. Am I doing the right thing? Am I spending the money on the right thing right now, or should be out there looking for a stable job? It's a fear of threat to social esteem because you're dealing with lots of stakeholders with lots of different interests and you don't want to disappoint any of them. And then finally is the fear of your inability of securing funding for your business. But it's also very important to study fear of failure in the specific context of entrepreneurship because we've been able to finally prove that fear of failure is present within the context of entrepreneurship. Up to 10 years ago, the domain of entrepreneurship was dominated by the belief that entrepreneurs don't experience fear of failure. This is not true. Fear is a human emotion, and also the entrepreneurial process is full of obstacles and negative or very like lots of setbacks, how can we think that entrepreneurs are so impermeable? They're not they don't have the risk of experiencing fear failures. It's crazy. We all do, and especially them, because everything can happen that can stop you from accomplishing your goal, which is building a venture and becoming successful. So now we know that that entrepreneurs experience fear. However, in society, at a societal level, we still think about entrepreneurs as superheroes with no fear. So when an entrepreneur experiences fear of failure, he also experiences a crash between what they're feeling and what they think they are supposed to be and represent, heroes with no fear. So what do they do? Well, they tend to deny, and they tend to practice impression management, tend to say, oh, I'm fine, I'm not experiencing this, everything looks good, when in fact they kind of they are really feeling something that it's pushing them down. It's making feel very stressed and not being really able to deal with the requirements of the everyday requirements of their business. And when they deny this feeling, they tend to push it away without walking it through and sharing it. What happens is that the feeling of fear will surface back at some point in the form of depression, isolation, and toxic positivity that have a strong negative impact on their well-being. And so at the behavioral level, what fear of failure does is basically making them to avoid taking action. But if they really work it through, and if they're really trying to find the motivational angle of fear failure, some entrepreneurs can use it as determination to win. Because ultimately, one way of avoiding failure, which is all we want to do when we experience fear failure, is to be successful. So how can we help entrepreneurs use their fear of failure to achieve success, rather than to fly away or to kind of ignore it and believe that it doesn't exist? There are a few things that we can do. First is to share awareness. And this is all start from the understanding that fear of failure is a common experience, and it is okay for entrepreneurs to experience it. And when we see an entrepreneur in fear, we don't have to doubt necessarily the ability to be an entrepreneur, because these are two separate things and they are not related. If I'm in fear as an entrepreneur, it doesn't mean I cannot be a good entrepreneur. It's normal to experience it. So let's help them to reframe what it is that they are feeling by changing our concept, the concept in our mind, and saying, my stress, my fear is not a negative thing. Is my body preparing me to face that challenge? Just by doing that mental switch, we are changing our physiology. And we are transforming a stress response into a courageous response, and we are protecting our well-being, because we are decreasing the risk of having lots of health issues attributed to stress responses. And the last thing which is really needed for entrepreneurs is, let's connect with them. Let's practice empathy rather than just simply interact with them. Let's connect with them and give them our hand and say, it's okay. How can I help you in facing this moment of negativity, and how can I help you rather than avoiding action? I want to be part of the process of transforming fear into the determination to win. This is all I have. I hope it helped you to change your mind about what fear of failure is and how we can help entrepreneurs to use it to accomplish success. Thank you.